transformation, micro and small medium enterprise economy, housing and settlement, healthcare and digital superhighway, as well as the creative industry. Special focus will be placed on the interventions that reduce the cost of living, create jobs, achieve more equitable distribution of income, enhance social security, and expand the tax base for more revenues to finance development. And finally, also geared towards increasing foreign exchange to give us flexibility in that market. Mr. Speaker, we intend to implement the policy priorities within a sustainable fiscal framework. Overall, we have moderated our spending to ensure the value for money and enhanced the revenue mobilization efforts to ensure that our public debt remains on a sustainable path. Prioritization is critical because resources are scarce, thus limiting our capacity and desire to cover everything at once. In this regard, the budgeting process for the priority programs under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda will be managed through a value chain approach. This has ensured that the resources located along the value chain are allocated to all the components along the value chain, thereby eliminating duplication of roles, removing any funding gaps, and enhancing efficiency in the use of available budgetary resources. Mr. Speaker, it is now my privilege and honor to present the economic and fiscal policy underpinnings the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda for improved livelihoods to Kenyans. Thereafter, I will broadly outline the proposed resource allocations and revenue-raising measures that the government will implement in the financial year 2023-2024 budget. But before I proceed to elaborate on programs, let me start by highlighting the economic context in which this budget has been prepared. Let me start with economic policy context and focus on the global economy. Mr. Speaker, the financial year 2023-2024 budget has been prepared against a background of increased uncertainties in the global economic outlook, reflecting continued geopolitical tensions, particularly the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, and the pace of monetary policy tightening amidst concerns about financial sector stability in the advanced economies. As a result, the global economic growth is projected to slow down to 2.8% in 2023 from 3.4% in 2022. Economic prospects are also expected to slow down across regions and countries. Nevertheless, the commodity prices in the global markets, particularly oil and food, have been easing due to improved and functioning supply chains. Let me turn to domestic economy. Mr. Speaker, on the domestic scene, the economic growth for 2022 slowed down to 4.8% from 7.6% in 2021 due to adverse impact of the multiple shocks that affected the economy. Kenya's growth in 2022 was supported by growth in the services sector, while the agricultural sector contracted for the second consecutive year due to the prolonged drought effects, but that also contributed to a slowdown in the growth of manufacturing sector as well as that of wholesale and retail trade sectors. Mr. Speaker, the economy is expected to rebound and expand by 5.5% in 2023 up from 4.8% in 2022. And it is supposed to maintain that pace of the medium term. The growth will be supported by a broad-based private sector-led growth, including continued strong performance of the services sector and the recovery from the agricultural sector due to improved weather conditions during the March-May rainy season. This growth outlook will be reinforced by interventions being implemented by the government under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda that include the provision of subsidized fertilizer and seeds to farmers during the planting season, Further, economic activity is expected to improve and drive aggregate demand expansion as the international community, international commodity prices is coupled with improved exports and resilient private sector consumption, as well as the ongoing public-private investments. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to support economic recovery by pursuing prudent macroeconomic policies geared towards reducing debt vulnerabilities and supporting sustainable and inclusive development. Inflation rate has remained above 7.5%, which is the upper bound target since June 2022. This is driven mainly by high food prices and energy prices following the adverse weather conditions and high global oil prices, but also compounded by the pass-through effects from the domestic currency depreciation. In order to anchor inflation expectations, the Central Bank of Kenya, through Monetary Policy Committee, tightened monetary policy during the last 1 year by raising the central bank rate to 9.5% in March 2023 from 7.5% in May 2022. This monetary policy action, together with improved agricultural production occasioned by the long rains and supported by fertilizer subsidy program and the ongoing importation of key food items, particularly maize, cooking oil, rice, sugar, at a duty-free window, are expected to ease the domestic prices and basic food items. Already, the inflation pressures are easing with inflation rate at 8% in May 2023 from the highs of 9.6% in October 2022. Inflation rate is expected to return to the target range within the second quarter of financial year 2023-2024. Also, in addition, credit to the private sector has grown by 13.2% in the last 12 months to April 2023, and this is supporting economic activity. Most sectors of the economy continue to receive positive credit flows. Mr. Speaker, to further anchor inflation expectations, the Central Bank of Kenya will continue to implement reforms outlined in the White Paper on modernization of the monetary policy framework and operations that are aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of monetary policy formulation and implementation to prevent monetary policy falling behind the curve. These reforms include refining macroeconomic forecasting frameworks in line with the changing structure of the economy, improving the functioning of the interbank market to strengthen monetary policy transmission, and continued improvements of communication on monetary policy decisions. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy stance over the medium term aims at supporting the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda through growth-friendly fiscal consolidation plan designed to slow down the annual growth in public debt and implement an effective liability management strategy without compromising service delivery to citizens. This will improve the country's debt sustainability position. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the policy priorities of the government for fostering economic transformation and improved livelihoods. The policy priorities and structural reforms for improved livelihoods start with the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget places special emphasis on priorities at the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, which is detailed in 2023 budget policy statement that was approved by this House in March 2023. This agenda is premised to address the challenges of the economy is facing, to stimulate economic recovery, bolster resilience while building on the success realized over time. The strategy will involve increasing investment in at least 5 sectors envisaged to have the largest impact and linkages to the economy, as well as on household welfare. The priority programs are classified under 2 categories, namely the core pillars and the enablers. that aim at the creation of a conducive business environment for socio-economic transformation. Mr. Speaker, as indicated earlier, in this statement, the core pillars include agricultural transformation, micro, small, and medium enterprises of the economy, housing and settlement, healthcare, and digital superhighway, and in creative industry. In order to make this program feasible, the government will implement strategic interventions under the following key enablers. First, the infrastructure, manufacturing, the blue economy, the services sector, the environment and climate change, education and training, women agenda, youth empowerment and development agenda, social protection, sports, culture and arts, as well as the governance. Mr. Speaker, in order to realize the aspirations of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, the government will first continue to maintain macroeconomic stability and enhance the security to foster and secure conducive business environment for all Kenyans and their investment. Second, the government will intensify national infrastructure development and connectivity of roads and port, energy and fiber optic infrastructure to lower the cost of movement of people and goods, lower the cost of doing business, thereby enhancing profitability of businesses. Third, the government will enhance investment in key economic sectors for broad-based sustainable economic recovery by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation and water supply, food security, climate change mitigation and adaptation, tourism recovery, and sustainable land use and management. In this regard, food security and climate change will also become a focal point for policy formulation going forward. Fourth, the government will expand access to quality social services in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for the vulnerable population. And finally, the government will support the youth, women, persons living with disabilities through government-funded empowerment programs that leverage on partnership with private sector organizations. Mr. Speaker, the government, under the support of the development partners, is implementing a program that aims at boosting revenue mobilization to reduce total expenditures as a percentage of GDP, thereby providing growth-friendly fiscal consolidation plan designed to slow down the annual growth of public debt and implement an efficient liability management strategy, without at the same time compromising service delivery to citizens. The fiscal consolidation plan targets gradually reduce the fiscal deficit, including grants, from 6.2% of GDP in the financial year 2021-2022 to 5.8% of GDP in the financial year 2022-2023 to 4.4% of GDP in financial year 2023-2024, and further reduce the fiscal gap further to 3.6% in financial year 2025-2026. Mr. Speaker, we are truly grateful as a nation to our development partners who have over the years provided financial resources to support the implementation of government programs, government policy, as well as structural reforms. In particular, allow me to single out the multilateral institutions, specifically the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the European Union, the African Development Bank, and the many bilateral donors, institutions, and governments that have walked the journey of socio-economic transformation with Kenya. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has continued to successfully implement the Extended Fund Facility and Extended Credit Facility, EFF and ECF arrangements supported by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. We concluded the fifth review of the program in May 2023, and we agreed on the augmentation of access under the program of 75% of the quota, that is SDR, special drawing rights for 407.1 million, or which is about US $544.3 million, an extension of the duration of the ECF arrangement by 10 months to April 2025 to allow sufficient time for meeting the program objectives, and on a new 20-month Resilience and Sustainability Facility, RSF, arrangement that will allow us to access 75% of our quota that will run parallel with the ECF program arrangements until April 2025. Once approved by the IMF Executive Board in July 2023, Kenya will immediately access SDR 306.7 million, which is about $410 million, including from the augmentation of the access under ECF. This will bring the cumulative IMF financial support disbursed under the ECF program arrangements to SDR 1.509 billion, or about $2.017 billion. And for us, that's why we are appreciative of this multilateral institution. The government will also access additional SDR 407.1 million, about $443 million under the new 20-month Resilience Sustainability Facility arrangement upon successful next review. Mr. Speaker, when combined with RSF support, the cumulative IMF commitment to Kenya will be about SDR 2.633 billion, which is about $3.52 billion by April 2025. Mr. Speaker, as a stopgap measure to ease the pressure on the domestic supply of petroleum products, as well as ease pressure on the Kenya shilling arising due to the global shortage of US dollars in the domestic market, we have introduced an innovative new government-to-government arrangement for fuel importation through Regal Notice number 3 of 2023. That Regal Notice allows us to import the importation of petroleum products by private sector through the current open tender system, OTS. To date, the monthly importation of petroleum products is approximately 740,000 metric tons, of which 60% is consumed in the domestic market, while 40% is for transit markets in the region. This product is currently paid for using United States dollars, which puts strain on foreign exchange availability and pressure on nominal exchange rate and ensuing exchange rate volatility in the market on a monthly basis. Mr. Speaker, to contain the pressure of the US dollar availability in the market, as well as exchange rate volatility on a monthly basis, the government entered into a memorandum of understanding with governments of oil-producing countries under which framework agreements have been signed with petroleum exporting companies for the supply of petroleum products on extended credit period of 180 days. The objective of this arrangement is first to ease the monthly demand of the US dollars in the foreign exchange market that is driven by petroleum imports, and by extending time required to source the US dollars from the current 5 days to 180 days. Second, to allow space to activate the interbank foreign exchange market and thus stem currency speculation, it was necessary to enter into this program that we intended to reduce the cost of petroleum products by lowering the economies of leveraging on the economies of scale that arise from having longer supply contracts up to 270 days with potential suppliers. And fourth, we wanted to make sure that we avert supply disruptions by safeguarding longer-term supply contracts for petroleum products. And finally, it has allowed us to structure, in the future, to structure the fuel pricing mechanism that will be dependent on market conditions. Currently, the fuel pricing mechanism coordinates expectations of price revisions on the 15th day of every month, a situation that does not reflect appropriate market conduct, as well as encourage diverse market development paths in this subsector. I now turn to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Mr. Speaker, the climate change has become a pressing issue globally. Like other economies, Kenya economy is vulnerable to its ravaging impacts. Indeed, we have just come out of the worst drought in 40 years, which has claimed lives of people and livestock, while at the same time threatened the livelihoods of millions of Kenyans. Given our vulnerability to climate change, it is imperative that we build a more climate-resilient economy. For this reason, the government has stepped up climate adaptation and mitigation efforts, including green energy, smart agriculture, decarbonized manufacturing, e-mobility, and green building. All these are aimed at the attainment of zero carbon by 2050. The government has committed to secure our future and to achieve a clearer and safer environment for all Kenyans by reducing greenhouse emissions, halting and reversing deforestation, biodiversity loss, and land degradation. In this regard, issues of climate change, mitigation, and adaptation have been mainstreamed in all government programs and across all levels of government. As part of drought mitigation measures and the climate adaptation program, the government is implementing a national tree planting campaign which is championed by His Excellency the President and seeks to enhance our national tree cover from 12% to 30% by year 2032. This will entail planting at least 15 billion trees over that period. Mr. Speaker, climate financing has emerged as a very important means of implementation of climate change and for promoting sustainable development and financial sector development. To enhance financial flows from the Green Climate Fund, GCF, the government will continue to implement National Green Climate Fund strategy, which provides an elaborate framework of coordinating and attracting resources from the Green Climate Fund. The government will also implement financing locally led climate action, we call it FROCA program, in collaboration with county governments and development partners to manage climate risks. Further, to support our climate change efforts and characterize additional climate finance from other official and private partners, we have agreed with the IMF on a new 20-month resilience sustainability facility arrangement that will run in parallel with the current program arrangement until April 2025. Mr. Speaker, the government last year committed to fast-track the enactment of Disaster Risk Management Bill and finalize the Public Finance Management Disaster Risk Management Fund regulations. These are meant to strengthen the disaster risk management in the country, given that Kenya is predisposed to various disasters, some of which are exacerbated by the ravaging effects of climate change. These disasters often have a huge negative impact on the economy. I wish to report that the relevant departmental committee of this House is in the process of considering registration on matters relating to disaster risk management. I urge this House to prioritize this matter to enable Kenya have an overarching framework on disaster risk management. I will later be submitting to this House for consideration the Public Finance Management, into brackets, the Disaster Risk Management Fund Regulations 2023 that will enable the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Fund. Let me turn to legal and policy, legal and institutional reforms. Mr. Speaker, the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda, BETTER, will be underpinned by sound and appropriate policy, legal and institutional reforms that are aimed at improving the business environment, increasing the efficiency of public service delivery, and strengthening the accountability and transparency in public finance management. These reforms are outlined as follows. First, the procurement reforms. Mr. Speaker, on a continuous basis, the government reviews the procurement policies and procedures to ensure that we achieve efficiency and transparency and enhance good governance and promote savings in the procurement process. This is one critical area that government can achieve efficiency and unlock savings given the limited financial resources and fiscal space. With this in mind, Mr. Speaker, last year, the National Treasury committed to this House to roll out an end-to-end e-government procurement system, EGP, with a pilot phase commencing in July 2022 and a target date for full rollout to all ministries, departments, and agencies in January 2023. I wish to report to this House that the process is still in progress, albeit with some delays. The system will be rolled out by December 2023 to both national and county governments. Once rolled out, all government procurement and asset disposal procedures and processes will be managed online through the system. The system will enhance efficiency and transparency in the procurement functions. The system will also ease cost of doing business with the government and has the capabilities of monitoring and tracking all public procurement and asset disposals. Mr. Speaker, the government remains committed to facilitate access to government procurement opportunities and empower the MSMEs owned by women, youth, and persons with disabilities. This remains a key priority of government under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. For this reason, the National Treasury has re-engineered the access of government procurement opportunities, AGPO, portal to enable real-time registration and monitoring. The National Treasury has also directed all procuring entities to ensure prompt payment of all contracts successfully implemented under the AGPO that will enable businesses owned by the target group access liquidity promptly. Mr. Speaker, a large number of state corporations rely on the exchequer funding to service their payroll and other expenses. Over the years, bloated payrolls have remained a large burden to the exchequer, resulting in cumulated unserviced statutory obligations and also pensions liability running into billions of Kenya shillings. It has also been established that in most state corporations, a huge proportion of the staff complement comprises of support staff with a thin complement of technical staff. This gravely affects the core service delivery. To address this challenge, the State Corporations Advisory Committee, SCAC, will immediately embark on an aggressive program to rationalize staff establishment to keep them lean and strictly adhere to 70-30 ratio of technical staff to support staff. In addition, the National Treasury shall henceforth only approve budgets for hiring staff for only state corporations that have received approvals from the State Corporations Advisory Committee, the Public Service Commission, PSV, and Salary and Remuneration Committee together jointly. This requirement is in addition to confirmation of the requisite funding. Mr. Speaker, to support the restructuring of the state corporation, the Cabinet approved the Privatization Bill 2023. It seeks to repeal the Privatization Act of 2005 and streamline the privatization process and in order to restructure the state-owned enterprises. This was subsequently submitted to this House by the National Treasury in May 2023. The bill, once enacted, will enable the selected state-owned enterprises to achieve their full potential by entrenching commercial principles and reduce their reliance on the exchequer funding. I urge honorable members to support the government in this endeavor. Mr. Speaker, in financial year 2022-2023, the government initiated a number of reforms in Kenya Power and Lighting Company, KPLC, and Kenya Airways, KQ, aimed at improving their efficiencies, reducing costs, and increasing revenues. To further enhance KPLC's financial sustainability, the government will restructure the balance sheet, mainly focusing on the huge loan balances, payables, and receivables. This will in turn address the current huge liquidity gap at KPLC. Towards this end, the government will implement a 4-point action plan focusing on, first, transfer of all transmission asset stroke lines to Kenya Electricity Transmission Company, KETRACO. Second, the government will settle outstanding rural electrification schemes, RES operations and maintenance costs, which has a deficit of 19.4 billion as of June 2022, and ensure that KPLC and Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation enter into a commercial contract for the future rural electrification schemes maintenance costs. Third, the government will develop and implement a turnaround strategy that includes the reduction of system losses from the current 22.4% to 14.4% by end of June 2025. Fourth, the government will establish a new governance structure of KPLC to give private sector stakeholders fair representation reflecting the company's shareholding structure. With regard to Kenya Airways, the government's policy stance is to turn around the airline and position it as a Pan-African carrier that will ensure it is run with profitability and sustainability objectives, eventually reducing the airline's dependency on budgetary support. Let me turn now to pending bills for the national and county governments. Mr. Speaker, the total outstanding national government's pending bills as of 31st March 2023 amounted to 537.2 billion, comprising of 450 billion for state corporations, semi-autonomous government agencies, and Kenya shillings 79.3 billion for ministries, departments, and agencies. During the same reporting period, the county governments reported pending bills of Kenya shillings 159.7 billion. The management of the pending bills is a challenge. In the public eye will form an important benchmark, and in the public eye it will form an important benchmark upon which the overall integrity of government style of financial management will be tested and judged. The delay in settling payments of pending bills has led to deterioration of financial positions of businesses, in particular micro and small medium enterprises, including business owned by women, youth, persons with disabilities. In view of the above, the National Treasury has prepared a cabinet memo requesting the cabinet to approve the establishment of a pending bills verification committee to carry out a thorough analysis of the stock of all pending bills and advice on how the bills would be settled. Once the outstanding pending bills are cleared by the verification committee, the National Treasury will direct all entities to ensure strict adherence to Public Finance Management Act of 2012 and clear pending bills as a first charge on the budget of the concerned entity in the subsequent financial years. Let me turn now to financial sector stability and development. Mr. Speaker, the banking sector remained stable and resilient in 2022. Deposits held by the sector increased by 12.3%, while pre-tax profits increased by 22.0%. On the other hand, gross non-performing loans for the sector stood at 13.3% in December 2022, a decline from 14.7% in June 2022. The need to build resilience and to exploit emerging opportunities has led to increased consolidation as well as regional expansion through acquisitions. This has led to strong institutions supporting the stability of the banking sector. The sector is therefore expected to remain sound and stable in 2023, building on the reform initiatives and buffers that have been built over the years. Mr. Speaker, in order to address consumer protection concerns arising from unregulated digital lenders, the Central Bank of Kenya introduced Digital Credit Providers Regulations 2022 that were approved in May 2022. They provide regulations and guidelines for the licensing and oversight of previously unregulated digital credit providers. I'm happy to report that by the end of March 2023, 32 digital credit providers have been licensed, while others are at different approval stages. More importantly, the Central Bank of Kenya is working with other agencies and regulators, including the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, to ensure all digital credit providers are brought into the regulatory perimeter to protect consumers. Mr. Speaker, in an effort to transform Kenya's financial markets, the Central Bank will soon launch the upgraded Central Securities Depository Code named DAO-CSD. The upgraded Central Securities Depository will improve financial market liquidity, enhance operational efficiency in domestic debt market, further promoting market deepening, and also broadening financial inclusion through expansion of digital access and position Kenya as the preferred financial hub in the region. The Central Securities Depository will also scale up services to the public sector, to the public market participants, and support our diaspora investors via a versatile and highly scalable digital solution with capacity to deliver seamless investor experience and convenience. Mr. Speaker, since the launch of the National Payments Strategy 2023-2025 in February 2022, the Central Bank has implemented major initiatives to improve quality, access, and affordability of payment services to Kenyans. These include implementation of mobile money interoperability, licensing of new payment service providers, and rollout of key standards that increase convenience of payment services in line with global best practices. Building on these gains, in the financial year 2023-2024, the Central Bank, together with other stakeholders, will first undertake a comprehensive review of the National Payments System Act of 2011 and National Payment System Regulations of 2014 to modernize Kenya's payments legal and regulatory framework in line with emerging trends, innovations, and enhanced oversight for improved service delivery to Kenyans. Second, it will develop and implement an interoperable payments platform to unlock cost-effective, real-time, and retail payments across banks, payment service providers, card schemes, and other regulated financial institutions. This will further contribute to lowering the cost of these services, increase choice, competition, stability, and widespread adoption of digital payments among Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce money laundering vulnerability, the Central Bank has reviewed and enhanced the banking sector Know Your Customer (KYC) and Customer Due Diligence (CDD) processes. This will further strengthen the effectiveness of the banking sector, anti-money laundering, and combating of financing of terrorism and the proliferation of financing (PF), risk-based supervisory framework. Indeed, AML CFT PF regime is important to uphold. Let me turn to deposit insurance reform. Mr. Speaker, financial stability risks have increased rapidly as the resilience of the global financial system has being tested by high inflation and rising interest rates. In order to enhance protection of the depositors, the Kenya Deposit Insurance Corporation is in the process of reviewing the current coverage limit of 500,000 with a view to ascertain its adequacy in protecting the micro, small, and medium enterprises. In addition, the corporation has developed an alternative dispute resolution mechanism and framework to address disputes between financial institutions that have been crossed and their respective stakeholders, thereby fast-tracking release of available resources and winding up those banks under liquidation. Let me turn to Capital Markets Authority, Mr. Speaker. The Capital Markets Authority, capital markets remain a critical catalyst in mobilizing of savings and investments towards productive enterprise in Kenya. In order to support micro and small and medium enterprises, access to financing via capital markets, the Capital Markets Authority has developed the Capital Markets Public Offers Discount Regulations for 2023. These regulations will enable MSMEs raise debt and equity capital via Nairobi Securities Exchange. The authority is also implementing the Capital Markets Investment-Based Crowdfunding Regulations 2022, and that will support Kenyan startups to raise finance from both global and local investors. Mr. Speaker, as part of these initiatives to support the real estate sector, the LAP Trust, Imara Real Estate Investment Trust, late, has been listed in Nairobi Securities Exchange following the approval of the Capital Markets Authority. This will provide investors with a unique opportunity to invest in a diversified portfolio of income-generating real estate assets. Let me turn now to pension reforms. Mr. Speaker, pension coverage in Kenya currently stands at 22% of the working population, leaving majority of Kenyans without a pension cover. This underscores the need to extend pension coverage to the informal sector, which constitutes the majority of our workforce. To this end, Mr. Speaker, the government is working on a national pensions policy to address key concerns on coverage, portability of schemes, reciprocal arrangements to address concerns of Kenyans in the diaspora, and mitigate the fragmentation in the sector. In furtherance of the ideals at the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, the National Treasury has established an innovative scheme, the Kenya National Enterprise Savings Trust, KNEST, with a focus on the population in the informal segment of the economy. In order to promote uptake of the scheme, we will deliberately form strategic partnership to facilitate voluntary pension contributions for individuals in this sector and to continue to explore options to provide diverse pension solutions for self-employed individuals. Mr. Speaker, to effectively administer the public service pensions, the National Treasury will invest in modern technology and digital solutions to streamline pension processes and improve service delivery. In this regard, public service schemes will provide user-friendly online platforms that allow the pensioners to access their pension statements, make inquiries, and update their personal information conveniently. The government continues to implement public service superannuation schemes with the end goal of easing the burden of pension payments by the government. Me turn to insurance reforms, Mr. Speaker. In the past 2 years, the insurance sector has grown by 3.36 billion shillings from a premium of 273 billion. The industry has also attracted investment from key multinational players. In order to further enhance the growth of the sector, the Insurance Regulatory Authority has rolled out a micro-insurance framework that will contribute to increase penetration coverage for the individuals with low incomes. The authority will strengthen private insurance's role in the universal health care coverage, promote crop and livestock insurance, as well as support insurance for MSMEs. Mr. Speaker, there are no deterrent measures under the Insurance Act to motivate accountability and observance of directors' duties, as well as senior managers' professional responsibilities. To address this shortcoming, I have submitted to this House Insurance Amendment Bill 2023 to provide for offences relating to the management of an insurer. In addition, the bill will contain other amendments aimed at enhancing the efficiency of the Insurance Regulatory Authority in regulating the insurance industry. Let me turn to SACCO societies reforms, Mr. Speaker. The SACCO industry is characterized by many small and medium-sized SACCOs that find it difficult to effectively compete in the deposit-taking and credit markets. To address this challenge, the SACCO Societies Regulatory Authority, SASRA, is working on amendments to SACCO Societies Act 2008 that will provide the licensing and supervision of shared SACCO services platform. This initiative will improve the efficiency and competitiveness of SACCOs through establishment of cost-sharing digital platform to enable small SACCOs achieve economies of scale, while at the same time mainstreaming regulatory compliance in a cost-effective manner. Mr. Speaker, 12 years ago, the government introduced prudential regulation to secure financial stability of SACCOs and boost savings for members. However, there has been a lack of a resolution mechanism for financially distressed SACCOs. In addition to addressing these challenges, the SACCO Society Regulatory Authority has proposed amendments to the SACCO Societies Act 2008 to provide for a framework for appointment of trustees to the Deposit Guarantee Fund for SACCOs in Kenya, DGF. Let me turn to unclaimed financial assets, Mr. Speaker. The Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority Act does not provide for claimers to designate a beneficiary of their assets or to a cause of their choice, and therefore any claim must be paid to the claimant. To address this, I have proposed to amend the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority Act so as to empower claimants to designate beneficiaries of the unclaimed asset or to a cause of their choice. Let me turn to ease of doing business, Mr. Chairman, and consumer protection. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in order to ease the cost of doing business and minimize compliance costs for micro, small, and medium enterprises, the Competition Authority of Kenya will exempt MSE, medium and small enterprise sector from merger notifications, thus enabling startups, digital businesses, among others. Further, the authority will monitor and conduct surveillance audits specifically in the manufacturing and agro-processing sector so as to protect MSMEs from incidences and abuse of buyer power. Second, implement codes of practice. The Competition Authority will implement codes of practice to ensure that MSMEs in the retail and insurance sectors are protected from powerful buyers. The Competition Authority will screen and investigate infractions such as suspected cartels or abuse of dominance conduct, such as excessive pricing, price discrimination, predatory pricing, margin squeeze, to ensure a level playing field. And the Competition Authority will actualize and initiate actualize the initiative started with the National Assembly to address the issue of price fixing by professional services to make the fees competitive and improve the quality of services. On consumer protection, the authority will monitor and investigate emerging consumer issues on the utility sector, pharmaceuticals, digital financial services, e-commerce, insurance, aviation, and safety of basic commodities. In addition, the authority will seek redress through replacement or refunds to customers affected by dark commercial patterns, scams, fraud under the digital economy. Let me turn now to the fiscal framework. Mr. Speaker, the government fiscal policy for the financial year 2023-2024 and the medium-term budget aims at undertaking a growth-friendly fiscal consolidation plan to ensure debt sustainability. This will be achieved through improved revenue collection, primarily through broadening of the tax base and containing overall expenditure to target set, while prioritizing higher impact social and investment expenditure. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy targets to grow total revenues to 17.9% of GDP in financial year 2023-2024 and above 18.3% of GDP over the medium term. As part of the economic turnaround plan, the government will scale up revenue correction efforts by the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, to a target of Kenya shillings 4.0 trillion over the medium term. In order to achieve this, the government is undertaking a combination of both tax administrative measures and tax policy reforms. Mr. Speaker, regarding tax policy, the government will implement the national tax policy and finalize the medium-term revenue strategy for the period financial year 2023-2024 to 2026-2027. The national tax policy, which is before this House, will enhance the administrative efficiency of the tax system, provide consistency and certainty in tax registration and management of tax expenditures. The medium-term revenue strategy comprises rigorous administrative and policy measures to reform the tax system, which is expected to boost tax revenue over the medium term. On tax administration, Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Revenue Authority is implementing reforms to move towards seamless taxation by ensuring that its systems, taxpayers, and businesses are integrated to allow for the automatic movement of data through machine-to-machine based processes, and where appropriate, shift to real-time processing. This will enable KRA to monitor business transactions in real time, therefore sealing revenue leakages through tax avoidance and evasion. On the expenditure reforms, Mr. Speaker, the government will sustain efforts to improve efficiency in public spending and ensure value for money by eliminating non-priority expenditures, retiring expenditure and unsustainable consumption subsidies, reducing tax exemption, scaling up use of public-private partnership financing for commercially viable projects, and rolling out end-to-end procurement system. Mr. Speaker, to address the challenges of perennial low absorption of development partners' funds that have denied Kenyans the full benefit of this financing, the government will put in place policies and administrative measures to minimize payments of unnecessary fees and charges. Let me turn to revenue projections, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, supported by the tax policy reforms and administrative measures highlighted above, we project total revenue corrections, including appropriations in aid and grants for the financial year 2023-2024 budget, to be Kenya shillings 2.96 trillion, and that is equivalent to 18.2% of gross domestic product, GDP. Of this, ordinary revenue is projected at Kenya shillings 2.57 trillion, equivalent to 15.8% of GDP. Ministerial appropriations in aid is projected at Kenya shillings 348.7 billion, and grants are projected at Kenya shillings 42.2 billion. Expenditure projections, Mr. Speaker. Total expenditure projections in financial year 2023-2024 budget is projected at 3.7 trillion, equivalent to 22.6% of GDP. Of these, recurrent expenditures will amount to Kenya shillings 2.53 trillion, equivalent to 15.6% of GDP. Development expenditures, including allocation to domestic and foreign financed projects, contingency fund, equalization fund, and conditional capital transfers to county government, is Kenya shillings 743 billion, equivalent to 4.7% of GDP. Equitable share to county governments is projected at that 385.4 billion shillings. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to fiscal balance. Mr. Speaker, given the projected revenue and grants against the projected expenditures, the fiscal gap or fiscal deficit is projected to decline from Kenya shillings 718.0 billion, equivalent to 4.4% of GDP in financial year 2023-2024, from a projected Kenya shillings 840.9 billion, equivalent to 5.8% of GDP in financial year 2022-2023. The fiscal deficit will be financed through net external financing of a Kenya shillings 131.5 billion, equivalent to 0.8% of GDP, and net domestic financing of 586.5 billion, and that is equivalent to 3.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, our medium-term fiscal consolidation policy targets to progressively reduce the level of fiscal deficit from the expected 5.8% of GDP in financial year 2022-2023 to 3.6% of GDP in the financial year 2026 to 2027. Let me turn to public debt management, Mr. Speaker. Kenya's public debt remains sustainable, but with elevated risks of debt distress due to persistent global shocks that adversely affect the liquidity ratios. The depreciation of the Kenya shilling against major currencies and the rise of interest rates have elevated cost of debt service. Further, the depreciation of the currency has increased the size of the public debt stock, as half of the public debt is actually denominated in foreign currency. Although the debt burden has risen, Kenya has not accumulated debt service arrears, and the government is committed to honor all public debt obligations as they fall due. Over the medium term, revenue-driven fiscal consolidation policy stance is expected to improve further the country's debt sustainability ratios and debt carrying capacity. Mr. Speaker, the current limit of the debt as approved in 2020 by this House is Kenya shillings 10 trillion. Guided by the best practice, the government intends to change the public debt ceiling from a numerical number to a debt anchor in the form of a ratio of public debt to GDP in present value terms. The proposed change to the debt ceiling provides an appropriate guide for optimal level of public debt based on the country's ability to pay. This is the debt carrying capacity that can objectively be assessed, as well as provide directions on information on debt accumulation or reduction from time to time. In order to anchor debt ceiling in a statute, the National Treasury developed a Public Finance Management Amendment Bill 2023, which has been submitted to this august House for enactment. The bill was subjected to public participation in line with the requirements of the Constitution of Kenya on transparency and accountability in public policy formulation. I urge the honourable members to prioritize and consider this bill favourably. Mr. Speaker, the external debt service is projected to increase to Kenya shillings 475.6 billion in financial year 2023-2024 from Kenya shillings 242.1 billion in the financial year 2023, for financial year 2022-2023, mainly reflecting redemption of the US dollar 2.0 billion Eurobond, which is approximately 241.8 billion with the current exchange rate. In preparation for the redemption of this maturing bond, the National Treasury and the Economic Planning issued an expression of interest to bring on board a lead manager to advise the government on liability management options towards the resolution of the Eurobond 2024. Mr. Speaker, I wish to assure Kenyans and investors that our fiscal positions remain strong and the government remains committed to meet all maturing obligations as and when they fall due, including the maturing Eurobond for June 2024. Mr. Speaker, due to the limited fiscal space, the government has strengthened the public-private partnership, PPP framework, to leverage on private sector expertise to deliver projects that have strong economic, commercial, and environmental benefits that are also aligned to our national priorities with sustainability and climate change as key considerations and drivers. To ensure the sustainability of PPP projects, the Projects Facilitation Fund, PFF, has been operationalized. The fund will support project preparation, provide viability gap funding to projects, as well as a source of liquidity to meet fiscal commitments and contingent liabilities that may arise from PPP projects. Mr. Speaker, with the fund in place and the robust legal and regulatory regime, the private sector has the necessary confidence and security to invest in PPP projects. Indeed, in the last financial year, the National Treasury successfully mobilized Kenya shillings 15 billion by achieving financial closure of 2 clusters of urban roads projects under the Roads Annuity Program. The projects are currently in the construction phase. Additional projects that have closed include 2 renewable energy projects with a combined installed capacity of 70 megawatts. Further, to contribute towards government's agenda on bulk water supply and food security, several high-impact projects have been appraised and approved to proceed to the project development phase under the PPP model. These projects will provide production of additional 51,000 hectares to further strengthen the food security agenda, which is a high priority for the Kenya Kwanza administration. The bulk of water will increase potable water. The bulk water will increase potable water supply by an estimated 200,000 cubic meters per day. The National Treasury and the Ministry of Water and Sanitation have developed a water purchase agreement which will pave way for the private sector to develop projects in a sustainable way. The National Treasury is in the process of developing a 10-year infrastructure plan that will be cross-cutting across various ministries to support delivery and prioritization of projects. Mr. Speaker, to build on this, the National Treasury plans to mobilize an estimated Kenya shillings 100 billion in private sector capital through various priority sectors. The focus will be on priority investment and underlying key projects and programs in each sector that deliver nationally significant infrastructure. infrastructure drive growth and also unlock private sector investment with greatest potential of benefits to Kenyans. These sectors will include airports, seaports, blue economy, water, agriculture, industrialization, that is special economic zones, energy, including transmission lines, and digitalization, among other key sectors in the economy. Inclusion of local goods, works, and services will be emphasized for each project to contribute to overall economic growth by encouraging local investments in PPP projects. To also strengthen local investment, the National Treasury will be holding a series of roundtables to build local capacity in the financial sector so as to increase local financing of PPP projects. The National Treasury has embraced the climate resilience and adaptation framework for public-private partnership projects. This is to ensure that infrastructure projects are aligned to the realities of climate change. To achieve on the PPP mandate of scaling up private sector capital, the National Treasury will leverage on the continued support from development partners as well as other key institutions, both in public and private sector, including capital markets, pension funds, and commercial banks, in scaling up the private sector capital under the PPP framework. Let me turn to public investments management. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, the House approved Public Investment Management, PIM, regulations, 2022. The objectives of the regulations is to provide the national and county governments and their entities with a standardized approach in project cycle management to enhance transparency, accountability, prudent use of public resources, and public participation. The government will continue implementing the regulations to enhance efficiency in identification and implementation of priority social and economic investment projects. This will further curtail runaway project cost, eliminate duplication, and improve working synergy among implementation actors for timely delivery and development of the development projects. In the financial year 2023-2024, the National Treasury will develop and roll out the Public Investment Management Information System, PIMIS or PIMIS. It automates public investments management processes as outlined in the regulations to ensure that only projects with highest socio-economic returns are undertaken and prioritized for completion. Let me turn to resource allocation under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Mr. Speaker, the highlights of the budget allocation in the coming financial year are provided in recognition of the need to restrain borrowing and utilize the revenues and grants projected and in the fiscal framework. The proposed total programmed expenditures spending for the financial year 2023-2024 has been capped at 3.68 trillion. The bottom-up economic transformation agenda, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, the government will implement strategic priorities under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda that is geared towards economic turnaround and inclusive growth. The agenda focuses on 5 sectors that have been outlined, and they have been outlined because they give the largest impact to the economy as well as raise the household's welfare. This include, for purposes of repeating, agricultural transformation, micro, small, and medium enterprise economy, housing and settlements, healthcare, digital superhighway, and creative industry. Mr. Speaker, to ensure the effectiveness and efficiency in the planned investment in the 5 sectors, Kenya Kwanza administration has adopted the value chain approach to budgeting. In this regard, the government has identified 9 key value chain areas for implementation, namely leather, cotton, dairy, edible oils, tea, rice, brew economy, natural resources including minerals and forestry, and building materials. This will ensure that there is no break in the value chain, there is no break in the cycle of resource allocation for value chain, and that in the value chain, and that adequate resources are allocated to the entities along the value chain. And of importance, Mr. Speaker, this will eliminate any form of duplication of both draws and budgeting to ensure that there are no gaps and thus ensure efficiency in resource allocation. Agricultural transformation and inclusive growth, Mr. Speaker, the government will implement interventions to ensure food security in the country through climate change, mitigation and adaptation, thereby reducing the cost of living. As part of the country's long-term food security plan, the government, working with private sector, will continue to subsidize fertilizer in order to make it available and improve productivity in counties. This intervention is also aimed at creating jobs, as agriculture has the highest employment multiplier effect owing to its strong forward and backward linkages to other sectors of the economy. Mr. Speaker, in order to support our aspirations of attaining food and nutrition security, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 49.9 billion to relevant programs in this budget. Out of this, 5 billion shillings is proposed for fertilizer subsidy program, 8.6 billion for the National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, 2.7 billion for the National Agricultural and Rural Inclusivity Projects, 2.1 billion for the Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, 2.8 billion for the Emergency Locust Response, 1.4 billion for small-scale irrigation and value addition programs, 1.3 billion on food production and nutrition security program, 500 million for agricultural sector development support program, and 596 million for the food security and crop diversification projects. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 3.7 billion to de-risking, inclusion and value enhancement of pastoral economies program. Kenya shillings 2.1 billion for livestock value chain support project, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for Kenya livestock commercialization program, and Kenya shillings 166 million for the embryo transfer project. I also propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 350 million for the development of the leather industrial park at Kinani, Kenya shillings 220 million for livestock production, and Kenya shillings 132 million for leather value chain. To enhance animal disease control, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 130 million for sustainable sassafras and trypanosomiasis-free areas in Kenya, and Kenya shillings 135 for the establishment of liquid nitrogen hydrogen. Mr. Speaker, the realization of food and nutrition security also relies heavily on the sustainable utilization of the brew economy, resources. To promote this, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 2.6 billion for the acquisition, for the aquaculture business development projects, Kenya shillings 3.5 billion for Kenya marine fisheries and socio-economic development projects, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for marine fish stock assessment, Kenya shillings 580 million for capacity building in deep sea fishing, Kenya shillings 142 million for the rehabilitation of fish landing sites in Lake Victoria, Kenya shillings 141.5 million for the aquaculture technology development and innovations transfer, Kenya shillings 500.7 million for Liwatoni ultra-modern fish hub, and Kenya shillings 88 million for the development of the brew economy initiatives. Mr. Speaker, in order to increase agricultural productivity and enhance the resilience to climate change risks in targeted smallholder farming and pastoral communities in Kenya, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for climate smart agriculture productivity project, Kenya shillings 625 million to enhance drought resilience and sustainable livelihood program, Kenya shillings 318 million towards adding drought emergencies in Kenya project. In addition, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 300 for the crop insurance scheme to reduce the vulnerabilities of Kenya farmers to disease and natural disasters. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of RAD ownership, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for processing and registration of title deeds, Kenya shillings 2.6 billion for the settlement of the RAD race, Kenya shillings 755 million for digitization, Kenya shillings 755 million for digitization of RAD registries, and Kenya shillings 138.3 million for the construction of RAD registries. Mr. Speaker, transforming the macro, small and medium enterprises, MSME economy. Mr. Speaker, this is going to help us and to tackle the key bottlenecks of MSMEs on limited access to credit. The government rolled out in November 2022 Financial Inclusion Fund, popularly known as the Hustlers Fund, with an initial target budget of 20 billion shillings in the current financial year, as an intervention to correct market failure problems at the bottom of the pyramid. This program aims to lift those at the bottom of the pyramid through structured products in personal finance that includes savings, credit, insurance, and investment. This, together with other affirmative action funds like the Youth Enterprise Fund, Women Enterprise Fund, UESO Fund, and MSME's Credit Guarantee Scheme, will increase access to affordable credit to targeted persons and sectors, and thereby increase their investment and allow for private sector-led growth. To further support MSMEs, women, and the youth of this country, I propose to the National Assembly to effect an additional budget allocation of Kenya shillings 10 billion towards the Hustlers Fund, Kenya shillings 300 million to SMEs in the manufacturing sector, Kenya shillings 182.8 million for Women Enterprise Fund, Kenya shillings 175 for Youth Enterprise Fund, Enterprise and Development Fund, and Kenya shillings 192 million to UESO Fund. These allocation will inevitably guarantee access to affordable credit to the hustlers, households, MSMEs, and therefore accord them an opportunity to make their rightful contribution to nation building. Let me turn to housing and settlement. Mr. Speaker, the cost of housing is a heavy burden to the majority of Kenyans, and is the main factor driving the proliferation of slums in the country. The government's commitment is to turn the housing challenge into an economic opportunity to create quality jobs for our over 100,000 young people graduating from TVETs every year, directly in the construction sector, and also indirectly through the production of building products. This will be achieved through, among others, facilitating the delivery of 250,000 houses per annum and enabling affordable housing mortgages. To ensure success of this initiative, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of 35.2 billion for the housing program. This includes 7.3 billion under the Kenya Urban Program, KENUP, Kenya shillings 5.5 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for enhancement of the company's capital, as well as for on-lending to primary mortgage lenders. Kenya shillings 3.2 billion for construction of affordable housing units, as well as Kenya shillings 3.3 billion for the construction of social housing units. Other key proposed allocations to the housing, urban development and public works sector includes shillings 5.5 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 2, Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the construction of markets, Kenya shillings 932 million to the maintenance of government pool houses, Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya prisons, Kenya shillings 637 million for the Kenya municipal programs, and Kenya shillings 150 million for the construction of footbridges, and Kenya shillings 300 million for the development of appropriate building technology. Enhancing the quality and affordable health care. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Kwanza administration is committed and determined to realize the constitutional right to health in the shortest time period by delivering a universal health care coverage USA system. This entails promoting access to quality and affordable health care through the Universal Health Care Coverage Program. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 141.2 billion to the health sector to support various programs aimed at supporting universal health care coverage. Mr. Speaker, specific proposed allocation for the various activities and programs include Kenya shillings 18.4 billion for the universal health care coverage, Kenya shillings 3.7 billion for the Kenya COVID-19 Emergency Response Project, Kenya shillings 4.1 billion for free maternity health care, Kenya shillings 5.9 billion for the managed equipment services, as well as managed equipment services MES, as well as Kenya shillings 1.7 billion to provide medical cover for the elderly and severely disabled persons in our society. Mr. Speaker, to lower cases of HIV/AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis in the economy, Kenya shillings 24.8 billion is proposed at a global fund, and Kenya shillings 4.6 billion to enhance vaccines and immunization program. Mr. Speaker, to promote early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I propose to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for construction of cancer center at Kisii Level 5 Hospital, Kenya shillings 500 for strengthening of cancer center management at Kenyatta National Hospital, and an additional Kenya shillings 155 million is proposed for the establishment of regional cancer centers. Further, to improve the health service delivery, I propose to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of 21.6 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital, Kenya shillings 12.8 billion for the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, Kenya shillings 8.8 billion for the Kenya Medical Training Colleges, Kenya shillings 3.3 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for the construction of the Kenya National Hospital Burns and Pediatric Centers, Kenya shillings 1.4 billion for the equipping of laboratories and classrooms of KMTC, Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the renovation of Kenyatta National Hospital, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the procurement of equipment for the National Blood Transfusion Service, and Kenya shillings 352 million for the digital health platform. Let me turn to digital superhighway and creative economy. Mr. Speaker, the digital superhighway will play a critical role in enabling the government to achieve the objectives of bottom-up economic transformation agenda, as well as in enhancing revenue collection via automation of VAT systems. Digitalization and automation will increase productivity and competitiveness through providing quick access to the market and reducing information asymmetry, as well as improving risk management. Promotion of music, theater, graphic design, digital animation, fashions, and craft, among others, will increase employment for the youth. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of these interventions is expected to stimulate economic recovery while at the same time securing sustainable and inclusive growth amidst emerging challenges. But more importantly, improve the quality of growth from the public sector investment-led growth to a dynamic private sector-led growth. To achieve these aspirations, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 15.1 billion to fund initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, this proposed allocation includes 600 million for the government shared services to fast-track the development of the Concert Technopolis city. I propose the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 4.8 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for Concert data center and smart city facilities, and Kenya shillings 475 million for construction of Concert complex phase 1B. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include 5.7 billion shillings for the construction of the Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology at Concert Technopolis, Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of the National Optic Fiber Backbone Phase 2 expansion cable, and Kenya shillings 583 million for the maintenance and rehabilitation of the last mile county connectivity network. Mr. Speaker, having highlighted expenditures under the 5 priority sector areas of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, I now turn to other proposed areas of expenditure in this budget that will support our path towards sustainable and resilient economic growth trajectory. First, let me turn to investing in critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to expand critical infrastructure in roads, railways, sea, and airports to create an enabling environment for economic recovery and employment creation. Towards this end, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 244.9 billion to support construction of roads, bridges, as well as their rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, to expand the railway transport, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 37.4 billion for the second standard gauge railway. For the standard gauge railway. Kenya shillings 579 million for the rehabilitation of the locomotives. Kenya shillings 889 million for the development of Nairobi Railway City to facilitate movement of goods and people. I propose to the National Assembly to allocate Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project and Kenya shillings 300 million for the acquisition of ferries for Lake Victoria. I have proposed to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of, I have also proposed to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of Kenya shillings 727 million for the construction and expansion of airports and airstrips. Kenya shillings 500 million for the smart driving license, and Kenya shillings 2.6 million for infrastructure development in Dongo Kudu Special Economic Zone. Mr. Speaker, to support the production of reliable and affordable energy, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 62.3 billion. Out of this allocation, Kenya shillings 33.8 billion will cater for the national grid system, 12.1 billion will cater for rural electrification. Kenya shillings 11.4 billion will be for development of geothermal energy. Kenya shillings from 3.2 billion will be for alternative energy technologies. Let me move on to improving education outcomes, Mr. Speaker. The ultimate means of ensuring an equitable society is through investment in education as part of human capital development. For this reason, the government will continue to address inequalities in our education system so as to level the playing field for all children irrespective of their background. Mr. Speaker, to improve the education outcomes in the country, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 628.6 billion to the education sector. Out of the proposed allocation, Kenya shillings 12.5 billion will cater for the free primary education, Kenya shillings 65.4 billion for the free day secondary education, including insurance under NHIF for secondary school students, Kenya shillings 25.5 billion for junior secondary school capitation, Kenya shillings 5 billion to support examinations fee waiver, Kenya shillings 4.8 billion for recruitment of 20,000 intern teachers, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the promotion of teachers, Kenya shillings 4.9 billion for the school feeding program, and Kenya shillings 940 million for the provision of sanitary towels. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for training of teachers on competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shillings 400 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. To support infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in schools, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 6 billion for primary school and secondary schools infrastructure, including classrooms for junior secondary schools, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for construction and equipment of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, 1.8 billion is proposed to increase access and improve the quality of technical and vocational education training programs under the East Africa Skills Transformation and Regional Integration Project. Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations to the education sector to include 316.7 billion shillings for Teacher Service Commission, Kenya shillings 97.5 billion for the university education, Kenya shillings 30.3 billion for the Higher Education Loans Board, Kenya shillings 2.7 billion for Kenya Secondary Education Quality Improvement Project, and Kenya shillings 5.2 billion capitation for TVET students. Mr. Speaker, Kenya shillings 980 million is proposed for technical vocational education training and entrepreneurship, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for promotion of youth employment and vocational training, and 749 million for the research, science, and technology and innovation. Let me move now to supporting manufacturing for job creation. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve productivity in the manufacturing sector, as earlier indicated, the government has adopted a value chain approach through bottom-up economic transformation agenda. This will address bottlenecks that impede the growth of the manufacturing sector in order to create jobs and enhance the economy's competitiveness. To further promote local industries, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 26.9 billion under the various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of this allocation, 4.7 billion will support establishment of county integrated agro-industrial parks, Kenya shillings 3 billion for construction of 6 export processing zones flagship projects, Kenya shillings 3.1 billion for supporting access to finance and enterprise recovery project. Kenya shillings 500 million for the development of special economic zones textile park in Naivasha, and Kenya shillings 1.8 billion for the construction of an effluent treatment plant at Kenaini. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in order to maximize the benefits from our cash crop, the government will make further investment towards the revival of and enhancement of output. In this respect, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation to the revitalization of the cash crops. Kenya shillings 120 million for cotton, Kenya shillings 62 million for coconut, Kenya shillings 35 million for cashew nut, and Kenya shillings 150 million for pyrethrum. Mr. Speaker, I also propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 100 million for the modernization of cooperative cotton ginneries, Kenya shillings 134 million for the National Edible Oils Crop Promotion Project, and Kenya shillings 270 million for Sugar Reforms Support Project. Mr. Speaker, to equip the youth with essential internship opportunities, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for the Kenya Industry Entrepreneurship Project, the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shillings 300 million for the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shillings 332 million for the construction of industrial research laboratories, and Kenya shillings 182.9 million for the constituency industrial development centers. In addition, improving security, Mr. Chairman, the security is critical for creating a safe environment for the investment and protection of our citizens and their property. For this reason, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations for Kenya shillings 338.2 billion to support operations of the Kenya Defence Forces, the National Police Service, the National Intelligence Service, and the prison services. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation include 144.9 billion for the Kenya Defence Forces, Kenya shillings 98.6 billion for the National Police Service, Kenya shillings 44.3 billion for the National Intelligence Service, and Kenya shillings 31.3 billion for prison services. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 8.8 billion for the leasing of police motor vehicles. Mr. Speaker, for better equip the National Police Service, I have proposed an initial allocation of Kenya shillings 500 million for the police modernization program. Mr. Speaker, I will later be requesting this august House for enhanced funding approval once the ongoing discussions on a comprehensive police modernization program once it is concluded. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to step up war on crime and enhance support to administration of justice, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 856 million to equip National Forensic Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, the improvement of the welfare of our disciplined forces is at the center of the Kenya Kwanza administration. To improve housing accommodation for our defense forces, we shall fast track the delivery of staff houses through public-private partnership framework. We have already around Kenya Defence Forces to retain Kenya shillings 534 million currently collected from rental income and applied towards repayment for the houses once complete. In addition, Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, His Excellency the President appointed a task force to review the terms and conditions of police, prisons, and national youth service. We shall be presenting a funding proposal to this House once the discussions are concluded and adopted within the government. Mr. Speaker, Other proposed allocations include 2.9 billion for group personal insurance for police and prison services, and Kenya shillings 5.8 billion for medical insurance for police and prison services. Mr. Speaker, I move now to protecting the vulnerable groups. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of the government's development agenda is the inclusion in society and employment opportunities for the vulnerable groups, vulnerable members of the society. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of Kenya shillings 38.2 billion for the social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Out of this proposed allocation, Kenya shillings 18 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, Kenya shillings 7.9 billion for the orphans and vulnerable children, and Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, to ensure the elderly and other vulnerable groups under the cash transfer program do not take long waiting for their cash payment and cash transfers will be prioritized and paid alongside the monthly government payroll as and when it is due. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation for the vulnerable group members of our society also includes 5.6 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net program, Kenya shillings 3.3 billion for Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, Kenya shillings 900 million will go to Child Welfare Society of Kenya, Kenya shillings 400 million for the Presidential Bursary for the Orphans, and Kenya shillings 459 million for the National Development Fund for persons living with disabilities. These allocations shall remain ring-fenced from any budget rationalization and will be fully funded in order to achieve the desired results. Let me turn to equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment programs. Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the hard economic times following several negative shocks explained earlier in the statement. In order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by youth and women, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 81.9 billion for these initiatives. The proposed allocations include 13.1 billion for the National Youth Service, Kenya shillings 602 million for the Kenya Youth Empowerment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shillings 300 million for the establishment of youth empowerment centers, Kenya shillings 229.7 million to implement the Vijana Vuka na Avya, that is Viva youth program. To support the film industry, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of 100 million to strengthen the film industry in Kenya, Kenya shillings 49 million for film location mapping, and Kenya shillings 100 million for the Kenya Film School. Mr. Speaker, women participation in the key sectors of our economy is critical for the economy. For this reason, the government will sustain the increased incomes for women through employment creation and supporting women-led enterprises. We will further strengthen women participation in decision-making in our governance and political institutions, as well as reduce sexual and gender-based violence provision of affordable houses, affordable health services. To further empower our women, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 245 million to strengthen prevention and response to gender-based violence in Kenya, Kenya shillings 3 billion for the national government affirmative for the Kenya Government Affirmative Action Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote global equity, reduce poverty, and embrace social development, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 53.5 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, as well as 10.9 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs in previously marginalized areas. Let me turn to stimulating tourism, growth, sports, culture, and recreation and arts. Mr. Speaker, the government has prioritized expanding the space for creativity, including freedom of expression and protection of intellectual property rights. We will also strengthen mainstreaming of arts and culture infrastructure and support cultural production and creative economy. We are also cognizant of the brand value of Kenyans participating and excelling in international sports arena as of ultimate importance to us. To support tourism, sports, culture, and recreation, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 12.5 billion. This includes an allocation of 6.4 billion under the Sports, Arts, Social Development Fund, Kenya shillings 4.1 billion for the Tourism Fund, and Kenya shillings 2 billion for the Tourism Promotion Fund. Let me turn to environmental protection, water, and natural resources. Mr. Speaker, environmental conservation and response to the impacts of climate change are the center of government's socio-economic transformation agenda. To expand access to clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 43.3 billion for water sewerage infrastructure development, Kenya shillings 12.4 billion for water resources management, Kenya shillings 1.6 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I propose 19.7 billion for irrigation and flood reclamation, and now 1.9 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. Mr. Speaker, in order to support the environment and water conservation and respond to climate change, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 14.4 billion for forests and water towers conservation, Kenya shillings 3.8 billion for environment management and protection, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for the Kenya financing locally led climate action projects, 1.5 billion for meteorological services. In addition, I have proposed an allocation of 1.1 billion for human wildlife conflict compensation, Kenya shillings 800 million for wildlife insurance, Kenya shillings 400 million for maintenance of access road and airstrips in parks, Kenya shillings 319 million for drilling of boreholes in protected areas for provision of water for wildlife, and 226 million for wildlife research facilities. Let me turn to improving governance, sustaining the fight against corruption. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to scale up the implementation of the provisions of the 2010 Constitution, strengthen the rule of law, increase access to justice, and ensure respect of human rights. Mr. Speaker, to enhance good governance and scale up fight against corruption, I propose to the National Assembly to effect the budget allocation of Kenya shillings 3.9 billion for Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Kenya shillings 8 billion for the Criminal Investigation Services, and Kenya shillings 8.0 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. In addition, to embrace the oversight and legislative role of Parliament and access to justice, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 41 billion for the Parliament and Kenya shillings 23.2 billion for the judiciary. Completion of planned projects, Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure the value for money and timely realization of budgets of benefits accruing from budgetary allocation and implementation of planned projects, ministries, departments, and agencies have identified projects for completion in the course of the financial year. The projects will be fast-tracked and protected from any adjustment. The National Assembly is requested to support this endeavor as this is consistent with the resolution of this House. Transfer of national government to county governments, Mr. Speaker. The county governments will receive a proposed allocation of 385.4 billion as equitable share of the financial year 2023-2024. This is 23% of the financial year 2019-2020 shareable revenue, which is the most recent audited and approved revenue by the National Assembly. This is above the minimum threshold required under Article 203, Section 2 of the Constitution. In addition, the county equitable share, the county governments will receive additional conditional and unconditional allocations amounting to 56.7 billion. This brings total allocation to the county governments in the financial year 2023-2024 to Kenya shillings 442.1 billion. Part of this include 425 million for the transfer of library services being a devolved function. Kenya shillings 2.9 billion as outstanding mineral royalties share to 32 county governments as stipulated in the Mining Act 2016, a consolidated grant of 100 million Kenya shillings per county for the aggregated industrial parks program, which is meant to assist the farmers in the value addition and market access for their products. Let me turn to Equalization Fund, Mr. Speaker. In line with the Article 2004, Section 1 of the Constitution of Kenya, Kenya shillings 7.9 billion has been allocated under the Equalization Fund in the financial year 2023-2024. This represents 0.5% of the financial year 2019-2020 revenue, which is the most recent audited and approved revenue by the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, in addition to this, we have allocated 3 billion to cater for part arrears for the previous years, bringing the total allocation at the Equalization Fund to 10.9 billion shillings. Let me turn to transfer of functions between national government and county governments. Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury and Economic Planning, in collaboration with the Council of Governors and other institutions, developed a draft registration to operationalize Article 187 and Article 189 of the Constitution. This is on transfer of functions and cooperation between national and county governments and amongst county governments themselves. The proposed registration has gone through public participation with the county government executives, county assemblies, development partners, among others. Mr. Speaker, I will shortly submit the bill for the Cabinet approval and onward transmission to Parliament. Let me turn to measures to enhance county government's own source revenue. Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury and Economic Planning, State Department of Lands, Council of Governors, and other stakeholders have developed the National Rating Bill 2022, which went through the first reading on 8th March 2023 in the National Assembly, and thereafter was submitted to the National Assembly Committee on Lands. The bill provides, among others, standards in the way rating and evaluation is conducted in the country, how to deal with the properties cross-cutting in more than one county government, procedures for claiming and payment of contribution of real of rates, and timely updating of valuation laws by the county governments. More importantly, the bill will repeal the outdated Valuation for Rating Act Cap 266 and Rating Act Cap 267 and align property rating legal regime with the devolved system of governance. Our appeal to the House is to consider and fast-track this bill to unlock revenue potential to the county governments from property taxation as it was envisaged in Article 203, Section 3. Let me turn to sharing of mineral royalties revenue. Mr. Speaker, Mining Act 2016 assigns 70% of the mineral royalties collected from mining companies to the national government, 20% to county governments, and 10% to communities. Since 2016, county governments and communities have not received their share of these royalties. To address this matter, I have submitted a framework for sharing 2.9 billion shillings among 32 county governments for mineral royalties outstanding as of 30th June 2022 for consideration and approval by the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, during the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council (IBEC) 17th ordinary session held on 31st May 2022, IBEC considered and adopted a report and a framework for sharing of funds arising from contravention of county government registration. In the next financial year, the National Treasury has proposed Kenya shillings 108 million to be shared among the beneficiaries of county governments. Mr. Speaker, enhancement of county government has its own challenges. One of such challenges is multiplicity of fees and charges imposed by county governments that increase the cost of doing business and negatively impacts on our competitiveness as a country. Some county governments have imposed charges in a way that prejudices national economic policies, economic activities across county boundaries, or the national mobility of goods, services, capital, and even labor. As a result, the National Treasury and Economic Planning has been receiving a lot of complaints from the ministries, departments, state agencies, and the private sector relating to the uncoordinated manner in which counties are imposing multiple fees and charges. Mr. Speaker, some neighboring countries have also complained that some of the charges imposed by the county governments are against the East African Community Customs Management Act and East African Community Common Markets Protocol and may result in retaliatory measures and trade disruptions between Kenya and other partner states in the East African community. To address these issues, the National Treasury and Economic Planning has resubmitted the county government's revenue raising process bill of 2023 to Parliament for consideration and enactment. I urge this House to expedite the enactment of this bill in order to promote the competitiveness of our country in doing business and open up the country for investment. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to taxation measures. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to 2024 budget. I will begin by highlighting the key measures on custom duty as agreed by the ministers responsible for finance and economic affairs in the East African community during the pre-budget consultation meeting that was held in Arusha in May 2023. Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget consultations meeting, the ministers noted the significant contribution of manufacturing sector to job creation and economic growth in the region. The ministers therefore agreed on measures to prevent the proliferation of cheap imports into the region so as to protect local manufacturers from unfair competition and enable them to access raw materials and inputs at affordable prices. Mr. Speaker, the agreed custom measures shall become effective from 1st July 2023. Mr. Speaker, one of the success stories of the East African community is the establishment of the East African Customs Union as a single customs territory. In order to streamline importation of goods into the customs territory, the East African region completed the comprehensive review of the Common External Tariff, CET, and this has been under implementation from 1st July 2022. The revised tariff has a 4 tariff band structure compared with the earlier 3 tariff band structure. In the new structure, raw materials, that is, as well as inputs and capital goods, are imported duty-free. Intermediate goods are imported at a rate of 10%, while finished goods, which are not available in the region, are imported at a 25% tax. Finally, Mr. Speaker, all finished goods which are available in the region in sufficient quantities attract a common external tariff rate of 35%. The revised tariff bands are meant to cater for goods with long value chains which require differentiated rates to promote investments. Mr. Speaker, despite rice and wheat being among the staple foods in our countries, Kenya's production of these food items does not meet the domestic demand. In order to meet domestic demand, Kenya will import rice at a rate of 35% instead of 75% under the EAC Common External Tariff. Further, in order to ensure that there is enough wheat to meet local demand, while at the same time protecting wheat farmers from unfair competition, Kenya will import wheat under East African Community Duty Remission Scheme of 10% instead of 35%. The importation of wheat will be undertaken upon recommendation of the Ministry of Agriculture, who will ensure wheat millers, as a priority, purchase local wheat before they are allowed to import. Mr. Speaker, in order to support local automobile industry assembly in the region, the East African Community Partner States agreed to continue with the importation of raw materials for manufacture of parts used in the assembly of motor vehicles, and especially leaf spring, radiators, and wiring harness under the duty remissions. In addition, the region agreed to extend importation of completely knocked down kits for assembly of motorcycles at 10% under the duty remission, as the region awaits the finalization of the East African Community Assembly regulations. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has suffered capacity to manufacture various products in the metal and allied subsector, thus providing employment opportunities to many Kenyans, thus failing to provide employment to so many Kenyans. In order to continue safeguarding this sector, the East African Community Ministers agreed that imported iron and steel products shall continue attracting a duty rate of 35% with the corresponding specific rates for a further 1 year for Kenya. Mr. Speaker, our hard-working farmers are capable of producing enough food to satisfy domestic demand. In particular, local demand for most vegetable products has been adequately served by our farm produce over the years. To protect these farmers from cheap imports, Kenya has been around to extend the import duty rate of 35% in addition to the specific import duty rates on vegetable products for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of inputs of animal feeds, coupled with other factors like unfavorable weather conditions, make the locally manufactured animal feeds expensive and hence contribute to food inflation. In order to promote the local manufacturing and make animal feeds affordable to farmers, Kenyans will import inputs for manufacture of animal feeds duty-free at the East African Community Duty Remission Scheme for 1 year. Mr. Speaker, last year we allowed the manufacturers of baby diapers to access inputs for manufacture of baby diapers duty-free. This was meant to lower the cost of manufacturing these essential products. I'm happy to note that many companies have responded to this incentive by increasing production. In order to continue making these products affordable to our babies, the East African ministers allowed Kenya to extend the duty-free importation of inputs for manufacture of baby diapers for a further 1 year. Moreover, to protect these manufacturers from competition from imported products, the region allowed Kenya to extend charging imported baby diapers at a rate of 35% for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, leather industry is one of the priority value chain under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. In order to support local value addition and protect the industry from unfair competition, the East African Community Partner States agreed to retain the import duty on imported leather and footwear products at a rate of 35%. In addition, Kenya was allowed to extend the duty-free importation of raw materials and inputs for manufacture of footwear products. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has adequate capacity to meet local demand for roofing tiles. In order to facilitate access to Kenyan-made roofing tiles at affordable prices, Kenya was granted extension of a duty-free window for importing inputs for the manufacture of roofing tiles for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect the Kenyan producers of paper and paper products from the proliferation of cheap imports, Kenya was allowed to import these products at a rate of 35% for the next 1 year. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect local production of safety matches, particle boards, plywoods, among other goods of timber, Kenya was allowed to extend charging of specific rates of import duty in addition to ad valorem duty ranging from $120 per metric ton to $200 per metric ton on these goods. This is also meant to curb the undervaluation of goods and safeguard revenues further. Revenues. Further, Kenya was allowed to charge a rate of 45% on imported furniture in order to protect local manufacturers and producers. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient capacity to manufacture plastic and rubber products to supply both the domestic and regional markets. In order to protect local manufacturers, Kenya was allowed to impose import duty rate at 35% on these goods for 1 year instead of 25%. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect local assembly of smartphones and other mobile phones, Kenya was allowed to extend the import duty rate of 25% on smartphones and other telephones for cellular networks or other wireless networks for 1 year. Further, Kenya was allowed to extend duty-free importation of inputs for assembly of smartphones and other cellular phones. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has capacity to produce billets for manufacture of wire rods and other similar products to meet the local demands. In order to protect the local manufacturers of these goods, Kenya was allowed to charge an import duty of 10% on billets. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to tax measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2023. Let me start off with amendments to the Value-Added Tax 2013. Mr. Speaker, I now embark on measures proposed under the Value-Added Tax 2013. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, contributes to contributes to the escalating cost of living and continued use of firewood and charcoal, which negatively affects our forest cover. In order to make LPG affordable and promote its uptake, as well as encourage the use of clean sources of energy, I am proposing to the National Assembly to zero-rate VAT on LPG. Mr. Speaker, currently, exported services are subject to VAT at the rate of 16%. This has caused an increase in the cost of exported services, hence affecting the competitiveness of our services in the global market. In order to increase competitiveness and encourage exportation of taxable services, I propose to the National Assembly to remove VAT on exported taxable services. Mr. Speaker, currently, tea purchased for local value addition, either from the factories or tea auction, this will improve the cash flows of tea exporters involved in local value addition. Mr. Speaker, currently, helicopters, airplanes, and other aircrafts are unladen and other aircrafts of unladen weight not exceeding 2,000 kilograms are subject to VAT. Further, some spare parts of tariff numbers 8803 are expressly exempt from VAT. However, VAT exemption on any other aircraft spare parts imported by aircraft operators, all persons engaged in the business of aircraft maintenance is contingent upon recommendation by the competent authority responsible for civil aviation. This process creates administrative burden on the taxpayer to comply with the requirements. Mr. Speaker, we have also noted that the cost of aircraft maintenance and training activities has been high, prompting airlines to prefer undertaking these activities in other jurisdictions. In order to ease the process of VAT exemption on aircraft spare parts and encourage investment in this area, I propose to the National Assembly to remove the VAT on all aircraft simulators for training our pilots and aircraft spare parts. This proposal to expressly exempt from VAT on all aircraft and spare parts of Chapter 8.8 will spur the growth in the aviation sector and reduce the administrative burden of accessing its VAT exemption. Mr. Speaker, the international best practices is to charge VAT on all goods and services, and especially those that have undergone some form of processing. This is not the case in our VAT regime, as some of the goods have undergone some processing are also exempt from VAT, while others are zero-rated. This has impacted on the tax expenditures. In order to bring down the tax expenditures and also align with the international best practices, I propose to the National Assembly to rationalize goods and services in the first and the second schedules of the VAT Act by transferring some goods and services from zero rating to exempt status and from exempt status to taxable at the standard rate. Mr. Speaker, over the years, the petroleum products have received preferential tax treatment, gradually transitioning from exempt status in 2013 to 2018 and 8% at VAT from 2019 to date. This is irrespective of the fact that suppliers of petroleum products claim other input tax at the general rate of 16%, which means that the government has been sharing the burden of the input tax with business by subsidizing the difference of the general rate of 16% and the preferential rate of 8%. As a result, these practices and outcomes, the oil marketers have been in perpetual credit position and not paying VAT to the exchequer. This practice is discriminatory, and as business in other sectors of the economy bear the input tax by recovering the same from output VAT charged on the final consumer. Mr. Speaker, on reviewing the VAT rate on petroleum products to the standard rate, such business would at the onset recover the VAT credits that they have been carrying forward over the years, and government would end up correcting the VAT after some time. Mr. Speaker, if the anomaly is not corrected at the earliest stage, the build-up of credits will continue to increase, and should the government seek to charge VAT at the standard rate in the future, it would take years for the government to collect the much-needed revenue from this sector, since the credits have to be exhausted before businesses start paying VAT. The continued practice by government to subsidize cost of fuel by levying a preferential rate of 8% distorts the market, yet the economy should be operating on the principles of demand and supply. Mr. Speaker, in this respect, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the VAT Act to remove the preferential rate on the petroleum products so that the products will be subject to the standard VAT at 16%. Mr. Speaker, the brew economy remains largely untapped despite its huge potential. This is particularly due to low investments in maritime activities over the years. In order to spur investment and attract international sea freight in this sector, I propose to the National Assembly to zero-rate inbound international sea freight offered by registered persons. The government will continue exploring ways of providing more incentives to promote investment in this sector. Mr. Speaker, currently, machinery used by pharmaceutical companies are exempt from VAT on importation. This is meant to complement government's effort to ensure that all Kenyans have access to affordable health care. However, we have received numerous petitions to extend the exemption to locally purchased machinery to further boost access to health care services. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the VAT Act to extend the exemption to machinery and equipment purchased locally for use in the manufacture of pharmaceuticals. Mr. Speaker, in order to address the escalation of tax expenditures and foster prudent utilization of fiscal resources, I propose to the National Assembly to remove VAT exemptions in respect of taxable services supplied for construction of specialized hospitals, goods and services for the construction of tourism facilities, goods worth more than 2 billion purchased by manufacturers, as well as plant, machinery, and equipment used in the construction of plastic recycling plants. Mr. Speaker, currently, transfer of business as a going concern is subject to VAT at a standard rate. Taxpayers have raised concern that this discourages business reorganization and sale of businesses. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the VAT Act to exempt transfer of business as a going concern. This is expected to encourage mergers and acquisition, hence boost growth of businesses as well as their efficiency. I now turn to the amendments to the Excise Duty Act 2015. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight tax measures proposed under the Excise Duty Act. The Excise Duty Act provides for remittance of excise duty to the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, by the 20th day of the following month. In this era of technology, there is no justifiable reason for waiting for 20 days to report transactions to the KRA. In order to cure the delay, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Act to provide for a maintenance of the excise duty on betting and gaming activities within 24 hours after closure of transactions by the betting and gaming companies. Mr. Speaker, betting and gaming prize competition and even lotteries are addictive in nature and have negative socio-economic consequences to the society. To discourage participation in these activities by Kenyans, and especially school-going children, I propose to the National Assembly to increase the rate of excise duty on betting, gaming, prize competition, and lotteries from the current 7.5% to 12.5%. Mr. Speaker, there has been an increase in the importation of fish into the country, which has negatively affected the local fish industry. To promote and protect local fish industry, which provides livelihood to many Kenyans, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce an excise duty on imported fish at Kenya shillings 100,000 per metric ton, or 10% of the excisable value, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, the government charges specific excise duty on juices per litre. However, there has been an increase in supply of juices in powder form, and based on the current tax regime on juices, the powdered juice is not subject to excise duty. And this creates an unfairness in taxation of juices. In order to cure this problem and to create a level playing field, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce excise duty on powdered juice at a rate of 25 shillings per kilogram. Mr. Speaker, currently, specific rates of excise duty are subject to annual adjustment for inflation. However, taxpayers are concerned with the frequent changes in specific rates of excise duty through annual adjustment, creating uncertainty in prices and distorting the markets. Therefore, in order to create certainty in excise duty tax regime, I propose to the National Assembly to repeal the provision for annual adjustment for inflation. Mr. Speaker, consumption of sugar has been associated with various ailments, such as diabetes, which has become common in many families. To discourage consumption of sugar, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce excise duty on imported sugar at a rate of 5 shillings per kilogram, including sugar, but this excludes the sugar imported or purchased locally by registered pharmaceutical manufacturers for use in the manufacture of pharmaceutical products. Mr. Speaker, consumption of alcohol, betting, gaming, and lottery and prize competition are extremely addictive and result in harmful repercussions in the society, especially the youth. In order to discourage these activities and consumption of alcoholic beverages, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce an excise duty rate of 15% of excisable value of fees charged on advertisement by all televisions, print media, billboards, and radio stations in promotion of alcohol, betting, gaming, lottery, and prize competition. Mr. Speaker, to promote inclusion and enhance access to internet data services, I propose to the National Assembly to reduce excise duty from 20% to 15% in respect of fees charged for telephones, internet, data services, and fees charged for money transfer services by banks, money transfer agencies, and other financial service providers. Mr. Speaker, in the same spirit, I propose to the National Assembly to reduce excise duty from 12% to 10% of the excisable value of the fees charged for money transfer services by cellular phone services providers or payment service providers licensed under the National Payment System. This will encourage retail transactions at a more affordable rate and promote economic activity at the MSME and individual levels. Mr. Speaker, locally produced cement has been facing stiff competition from imported cement. To protect from the unfair competition and promote this industry, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce an excise duty on imported cement at a rate of 10% of the excisable value, or Kenya shillings 1.50 cents per kilogram, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, there has been an increase in the importation of furniture, especially office furniture, which has negatively affected the local carpenters and artisans, considering that there is enough local capacity to make furniture. In order to protect local carpenters and artisans, I propose to the National Assembly to impose an excise duty on imported furniture at a rate of 30% of the customs value, excluding furniture originating from East African community countries. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient local capacity to produce paint, varnishes, and lacquers. However, proliferation of cheap imports has reduced competitiveness of locally produced paints, varnishes, and even all the other products associated. To protect the local paint manufacturers, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce excise duty at the rate of 15% of the excisable value of imported paints, varnishes, and similar products. I now turn to amendments to the Income Tax Act. Mr. Speaker, let me highlight the proposed changes under the Income Tax Act. The current interest deduction restriction based on earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization was introduced in 2021 to discourage tax planning. This restriction currently applies to both local and foreign financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, I have received proposals from taxpayers who borrow loans from local financial institutions indicating that the restrictions discourages their access to credit. To address this concern, I propose to the National Assembly to exclude interest on loans borrowed from local financial institutions from interest deduction restriction. In addition, Mr. Speaker, where interest on loans borrowed from non-resident is disallowed, I propose to the National Assembly to allow businesses to carry forward that interest for deduction in the next 5 years, in the next 5 subsequent years. This will align to the international best practice. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, the government introduced simplified tax regimes, tax regime that requires landlord to pay tax on residential rental income at the rate of 10% per month. In order to enlarge compliance and encourage more landlords to pay tax under this regime, I propose to the National Assembly to reduce the tax rate for this regime from 10% to 7.5% per month. Mr. Speaker, in order to support startup companies, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Income Tax Act to defer the taxation of gains on shares offered to employees in lieu of their salaries in a startup company for 5 years, all till the date employment ceases, all till the date of sale of the shares, whichever comes earlier. Mr. Speaker, upon retirement, most senior citizens have no access to medical cover and spend their literal savings on healthcare services. In order to encourage employees save for their post-retirement needs, I propose to the National Assembly to provide tax relief of 15% of the contributions to a post-retirement medical fund, or Kenya shillings 5,000 per month, whichever is lower. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to exempt from income tax the investment income earned by post-retirement medical fund. This will reduce the pressure on the government expenditure on the medical care and accord the retirees access to dignified health care. Mr. Speaker, we have noted that family members have been using exemption from capital gains tax on transfer of property between related persons as an avenue to reduce their tax liability. In order to remedy the situation, I propose to the National Assembly to change the base of capital gains tax from the sale of property to be the original cost before the transfer to the family member in instances where a property is transferred to a third party within a period of less than 5 years. Mr. Speaker, despite the advantages brought about by the digital platform, the transactions usually conducted under the platforms are not in the tax net. I propose to the National Assembly to introduce a digital asset tax at a rate of 3% on the value of the digital asset transferred or exchanged. Mr. Speaker, to further create equity and fairness, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce withholding tax at the rate of 5% of the gross payment in respect of digital content monetization. This will apply to incomes generated through media and digital platforms. Mr. Chairman, currently, non-residents pay withholding tax on payments in respect to sales, promotion, marketing, and advertising services. In order to harmonize taxation treatment for residents and non-resident and ensure equity, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce withholding tax on the same services to residents at the same rate of 5% of gross amount. Mr. Speaker, resident companies currently pay 30% of corporate tax, while non-resident with permanent establishment pay 37.5% of their gains on profit. This creates an impression that Kenya discriminates between residents and non-residents. In order to harmonize taxation treatment for residents and non-resident companies, I propose to the National Assembly to reduce the corporate tax rate for non-residents from 37.5% to 30%. Further, in order to ensure that there is level playing field, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce tax on repatriated profits at a rate of 15%, which is equal to the rate charged on dividends paid to non-residents. Mr. Speaker, businesses deduct diminution value of implements, utensils, or even similar articles used in the production process over a period of 3 years in determination of the taxable profits. But in order to increase working capital for the businesses, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Income Tax Act to provide 100% investment deduction of the value of these items in the first year of use. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the government implemented various measures to cushion businesses from adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This included providing tax incentives during the period. With easing of the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery of businesses, I propose to the National Assembly to lower the upper thresholds for turnover tax from 50 million to 25 million and retain the lower threshold of Kenya shillings 1 million. In addition, I propose to the National Assembly that the turnover tax rate for this sector to be at 3%. Mr. Speaker, last year, the government provided various tax incentives to promote local manufacturing of human vaccines. That was applied in order to further support these manufacturers. So in order to continue supporting these manufacturers, I propose to the National Assembly to exempt the manufacturers in this sector from withholding tax on interest and royalties paid to non-residents. Mr. Speaker, the current payee tax structure has 3 rates and bands applicable to 3.3 million employees. The bands are as follows. 10% is applied to income tax, to income up to 24,000 per month. 25% is applied to the next 8,333 per month, and while 30% is applied to incomes above 32,333 per month. Mr. Speaker, employees who fall under the first category, who constitute about 42.5% of the total employed workforce and who earn a maximum of 24,000 per month, don't pay any tax to government, as the tax computed from this income is equal to the relief of 2,400 per month under the Act. The second category of employees, who constitute about 37.2% of the total working population and earn incomes between 24,000 per month to 32,333 per month, pay a tax rate of 25%. The third category of employees, that form 20.4% of the total employees, earn incomes above 32,333 per month and pay a tax at the highest rate of 30%. The tax structure for the payee, Mr. Speaker, means that the tax burden falls on 57% of the total employed workforce. The tax structure is therefore regressive, and as an individual employee earning income above 32,333 per month falls within the upper band at the rate of 30%, leaving no significant gap between employees who do not pay tax as a result of tax relief and those earning higher incomes. In this respect, we have to embark on the review of this taxation structure to make the tax bands more progressive, sharing the tax burden more uniformly across income groups. Mr. Speaker, at the start of this journey, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce 2 additional tax bands. A 4th band will be applicable to employees earning incomes between 500,000 per month to Kenya shillings 800,000 per month at the rate of 32.5%. And a 5th band that will be applicable to employees earning incomes above 800,000 per month at the rate of 35%. As a result of this change, the employees who will pay tax at 30% will be 19.5%, while those 2 new tax bands will affect 26.67% of employees. And the last band will constitute, let me repeat that. As a result of this change, the employees who will pay 30% tax will be 19% of the total while the two tax bands will affect 26,676 employees who constitute about 0.8% of total employed workers in the country. Mr. Speaker, we shall continue to review the pay structure to make it as progressive as possible and redistribute the burden of tax incidents. Measures to enhance tax administration. Amendments to the Tax Procedure Act 2015. Mr. Speaker, currently, Kenya Revenue Authority has no visibility on the transactions of trusts, largely due to lack of requirement to report to KRA by trustees. This makes it difficult to ascertain the tax payable on the incomes paid to the beneficiaries of trusts. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to require all trustees administering trusts in Kenya to maintain and avail records required by the Kenya Revenue Authority. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the tax compliance by use of technology, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to require taxpayers to issue electronically generated tax invoices which can be tracked and traced through an electronic tax invoice management system, the e-TIMS. Mr. Speaker, in order to streamline the tax administration and remove pressure to abandon taxes and grant waivers of tax, I propose to the National Assembly to amend Tax Procedures Act to remove powers to abandon tax, as well as waivers on penalties and interest that currently exist in the Act. Mr. Speaker, to encourage taxpayers to pay outstanding tax debts, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce a one-year tax amnesty on penalties and interest on the accrued tax debts up to 31st December 2022. In order to benefit from this amnesty, taxpayers will be expected to clear principal taxes between 1st September 2023 to 30th June 2024. And now I take this opportunity to urge all taxpayers to take advantage of the one-year amnesty to clean their tax ledgers by paying all tax arrears. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the power of the Commissioner General to correct taxes from non-compliant taxpayers using agency notices, I propose to the National Assembly to amend Tax Procedures Act to expand the scope of agency notices to cover default in payment of installment taxes, installment taxes, and in situations where taxpayers has made self-assessment and submitted tax returns but has failed to pay the taxes on due date. Mr. Speaker, submission of manual tax information to the Commissioner General poses administrative challenges and delays the decision making. I therefore propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to require the Commissioner General to provide a data management and reporting system that will allow taxpayers to electronically submit standardized transactional data on real-time basis. Mr. Speaker, impersonation of the Kenya Revenue Authority officers is an offense under the Penal Code and poses revenue risks. We have witnessed increased cases of impersonation of Kenya Revenue Authority officers. In order to curb this vice, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide for offenses and sanctions relating to impersonation of Kenya Revenue Authority officers. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the efficiency in administration of tax refunds and boost cash flow of businesses, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to allow taxpayers who overpay taxes to utilize overpaid tax to offset both outstanding tax debt and future tax liabilities. In addition, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide an additional 30 days for the determination of complex tax cases. This will provide more time for the Commissioner General to complete audit and investigate processes for complex tax refunds cases. Further, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to amend Tax Procedures Act to require Kenya Revenue Authority to pay approved refunds within 6 months. In instances where approved refunds are not paid within this period, I propose to the National Assembly to further amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide for automatic offset of the approved refunds against outstanding tax liabilities in other tax heads or even future tax liabilities. Let me turn to amendments to the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies 2016. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the proposed amendments to miscellaneous fees and levies. I had earlier stated that the government is committed to lower cost of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. In addition to removal of VAT on LPG, I propose to the National Assembly to remove import declaration fees, IDF, and railway development levy on LPG. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police Service are exempted from import declaration fees and railway development levy in respect to equipment, machinery, motor vehicles for their official use. However, this does not extend to other goods for official use, such as material supplies. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to extend the exemption to all goods purchased or imported for official use by the Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police Service. Mr. Speaker, the aviation sector is critical in supporting tourism and transportation of passengers and cargo. Currently, some aircrafts and parts of the aircraft are exempt from import declaration fees, IDF, and railway development levy, RDL. To further support this industry, I propose to the National Assembly to extend the exemption to cover all aircraft, helicopters, aircraft engines, and aircraft spare parts. Mr. Speaker, currently the imported goods are subject to import declaration fee at the rate of 3.5% and railway development levy at the rate of 2%. On the other hand, raw materials and inputs imported by registered manufacturers are subject to a lower rate of 1.5% for both import declaration fee and railway development levy. These differentiated rates pose administrative challenges and are avenues for revenue loss. In order to address these challenges, I propose to the National Assembly to harmonize these rates at 2.5% for import declaration fee and 1.5% for railway development levy applicable to all goods imported into the country. I now turn to amendments on Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act Cap 131. Mr. Speaker, currently the Kenya Revenue Authority has not been able to enforce tax collection from betting, gaming, prize competition and lotteries activities due to lack of an enforcement provision in the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend this act to allow KRA to apply the provisions of Tax Procedures Act in enforcing tax correction. Let me now turn to amendments to the Employment Act. Mr. Speaker, in order to provide funds for the development of affordable housing and associated social and physical infrastructure, as well as the provision of affordable home financing strategy, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce an affordable housing levy through an amendment of the Employment Act 2007 to provide a monthly levy payable by the employer and the employee at 1.5% per month for an employee's gross monthly salary. Mr. Speaker, given that the construction industry is labor intensive, we expect every housing unit constructed will create new jobs, both direct and indirect, among the professionals, youth, MSMEs in general, along the production value chain of affordable housing. In order to support enterprises and businesses operating in the special economic zone, Mr. Speaker, through government support, the special economic zone and export processing zone continue to position our manufacturing sector at a pace as pace setters in the region through exports and manufactured goods. Presently, Mr. Speaker, the goods sold from these zones to the domestic market are subjected to import duty and other applicable taxes similar to goods imported from outside the East African Community region. This taxation does not differentiate whether the inputs or raw materials used to produce such goods originate from the customs territory or from outside the customs territory. In order to enhance the market access, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Export Processing Zone Act and the Special Economic Zone Act to exempt from import duty goods produced from the Special Economic Zone and Export Processing Zone that use inputs or raw materials originating from the customs territory when sold into the domestic market. This will encourage enterprises operating in the zones to purchase raw materials or even inputs from the domestic market. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is clear that Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is clear that we face many socio-economic challenges. The global economy may take a long time before output gap is crossed, and the cost of living may take a long time to be felt. To address these challenges, the government has initiated policy, legal, and institutional reforms to address these issues. His Excellency the President has already led the way. Under his leadership, we have already laid a firm foundation for the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. The policies spelled out in this budget builds on a momentum for the envisaged transformation that will lead to improved livelihoods for all Kenyans. I therefore urge Kenyans to join hands in making this transformation journey a reality. Thankfully, our country is endowed with the necessary resources and human capital to confront the contemporary economic and social challenges and create a momentum for not only a higher and sustainable but also inclusive growth trajectory, but also create decent jobs, reduce poverty significantly. Mr. Speaker, this budget underpins the country's resolve and commitment to fulfill its social contract to Kenyans by progressively improving their welfare. At this point, Mr. Speaker, allow me to express my sincere gratitude to His Excellency the President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya, and the Commander-in-Chief of Defense Forces, and His Excellency the Deputy President, His Honorable Mr. Rigathi Gachagua, for their counsel, guidance, and support during the entire process of laying foundation for the bottom-up economic transformation agenda and finalizing this budget. I also want to thank Her Excellency Madam Rachel Ruto, the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, and Her Excellency Pastor Dorcas Gachagua, the Second Lady of the Republic of Kenya, for their support and contribution to the implementation of government initiatives, especially on the environment and climate change action, financial inclusion, and women empowerment. My special appreciation goes to the Prime Cabinet Secretary, the Attorney General, and my fellow Cabinet Secretaries in their respective Principal Secretaries and Accounting Officers and staff in the government, ministries, departments, and agencies for their support and contribution in making contributions to this budget. I also extend my gratitude to the Chairman of the Presidential Council of Economic Advisors, Dr. David Day, and all economic advisors at the Council for their critical inputs and guidance in supporting the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. This is one team that used their diverse frontier knowledge and worked closely in developing the Kenya Kwanza Administrative Manifesto, the PRAN, in the run-up to the 2022 general election. We have produced and pulled most of the materials for this policy outturn from the PRAN. And that guidance has been very, very critical. And so, more specifically, I gained a lot of support from my colleague and friend, Dr. Kamau Dhuge, Senior Advisor and Head of Fiscal Affairs and Budget Policy at the Executive Office of the President, and currently he's the Governor Designate for the Central Bank of Kenya, wishing and pass his congratulations. My sincere appreciations first to the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly and your counterpart in Senate, the majority and minority leaders, and the entire House leadership, including the respective class for the National Assembly, for the approval process and the budget estimates for the financial year 2023 and related documents. Second, to honorable chairs and members of both the Budget and Appropriation Committee, Finance and National Planning Committee, and all departmental committees in this House that help me in terms of, and help us and my team to finalize the budget propositions. Third, I recognize and appreciate the management and staff of the National Treasury and Economic Planning who have worked tirelessly for long hours, including weekends, to ensure that this budget and supporting documents meet the legal guideline. Fourth, the Kenya Revenue Authority, Central Bank of Kenya, the Attorney General's Office, Commissioner of Revenue Allocations, Financial Sector Regulations, and various agencies under the National Treasury and Economic Planning. They have made contributions, and we appreciate their contribution. Fifth, my gratitude goes to the multilateral and bilateral development partners for their continued technical and financial support. Further, I thank the private sector for the sustained contribution to the growth of our economy and even contributions to the debate in terms of the tax measures and policies. Sixth, I wish to appreciate the media and the non-state actors for their active engagement and participation in this financial year and even in the process of budget process making. Mr. Speaker, I remain immensely grateful to my family for their support and inspiration as I execute my duties as the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Economic Planning since the appointment. And finally, Mr. Speaker, my utmost gratitude goes to all Kenyans for their contributions, proposals, and suggestions we received during the finalization of the budget. We have covered acres and acres of materials that provided propositions coming from Kenyans, and we are happy that what we have provided is a synthesis and balance of what they presented. Mr. Speaker, before I resume my seat, you will recall that I have already submitted to this House the budget estimate and the Finance Bill 2023, together with accompanying documents as required by the Public Finance Management. Today, I further submit the following documents to the August House and request that you graciously receive them. First, the budget policy statement for financial year 2023-24 was presented. The 2023 budget policy statement, estimates of revenue, grants and loans, financial statements for 2023-24 budget, medium-term debt management strategy, budget highlights for Mwananchi Guide for the financial year 2023-24, statistical annex for the budget statement for the 2023-24 financial year. So I do present the remaining documents to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, before I assume my position. Thank you, Your Honorable Speaker. I now take my seat.
Honorable members, I wish to thank the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury for ably making a public pronouncement of the budget policy highlights for the national government for the financial year 2023-24 and the medium term and the revenue raising measures. It took 3 hours and 20 minutes to be exact. In this regard, honorable members, I confirm that in conformity with the provisions of sections 39 and 39A of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and Standing Order 244C, the Cabinet Secretary has already submitted to the National Assembly the relevant legislative proposals necessary to actualize the revenue-raising measures to finance the 2023-2024 budget. This has since culminated in the Finance Bill 2023, which is under consideration by this House. Honorable members, it's now my pleasure to invite all honorable members, the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, other Cabinet Secretaries, and all invited guests to a reception at the Parliament courtyard hereinafter. Honorable members, now you may be upstanding. The House now stands adjourned until Tuesday, 20th June 2023 at 2:30 p.m.
Ready?